Hello everyone. Today we will be looking at the music video of Dilao and how Maki and I created a story that touched the lives of millions. Before we start, this video is actually color graded with Dehancer. If you want colors like this, you can get 10% off with my code JDA. So hello everyone, my name is JD Alberto. I am the director of the music video for Dilao. I'm making this video to show you guys some of the thought process that I had during the pre-production of this music video. How Maki and I conceptualized, how and what are the reasons that I did what I did with the characters and you know, the intricacies of that. And just to give a little bit of backstory, Dilao was actually given to me 13 days before the shooting, and we had to come up with an idea, Maki and I, and I also had to build an entire team, get a director of photography from Manila. Shout out to Lexter, he's one of the MVPs of this shoot, honestly. Without further ado, let's start. There are 3 things that I like to keep in mind before I start actually writing the story in full. And, you know, I like solidifying these 3 things first before I start, so that when I actually do write the story, it becomes a bit easier to put yourself in the shoes of the character and, you know, live in the world that they live in and actually see what they would do when put into a certain circumstance. And these 3 things are the logline, the characters, and the world that the characters live in. Just a little bit of an explanation of what a logline is. A logline is like a short 2-sentence, 1-sentence summary of the premise of the story. And you have to present this logline to, you know, your client. For this, it was Star Music, ABS-CBN. And it has to catch the attention of these clients. At the same time, you have to summarize into those 2 sentences like what the premise of the story is and what, you know, what the emotions that you want to portray. It's also important for my process and to almost, I think, every filmmaker or storyteller's process to solidify the characters first. You have to solidify first like what their beliefs are, what their personalities are, what their weaknesses, strengths, flaws are, so that you know how to eventually put them in a direction that they would grow in the future of your story. For example, and imagine there's a spectrum here. Maki and Maloy are both loners that are artists, and Maloy is on one side, extreme side of the spectrum, that is unfulfilled, lonely, uninspired, and kind of bleak and jaded. While Maki is here as the very joyful, extremely optimistic, and sometimes almost even naive type of artist that is alone but doesn't feel lonely. And you have Maloy that is alone and does feel lonely. How will we make them go into the middle by the end of the story as they grow? And for the world, like my process, I actually like, you know, putting myself in a mindset that the story happens in a world or a timeline, a universe different from ours. Of course, it happens in the Philippines, but, you know, it's kind of more like a basis, the more solid thing. And I do this because, 1, it gives me more freedom when I actually do write the story. And number 2 is it becomes easier to put yourself into that world, you know, immerse yourself and see what the characters would have to go through in order for them to, you know, grow. So that's the 3 things I try to keep in mind first before I start writing the story. So I'll narrate over the story and show you some of my storyboards as we go along the way, and then afterwards I'll share my thoughts into every part. Okay. We start in the eyes of a girl, uninspired, lifeless, dull, waking up to go to school. We see the interior of her room filled with abstract drawings, devoid of color. So In music videos or in like short films, short skits, we don't get a lot of time to tell the story. So it's important to give as much background on a character as possible in the little time we spent with her before we introduced conflict. And this part of the story does that. That's something I always try to keep in mind when I introduce a character in a short story. She walks to school on a beautiful morning until Mackie, holding his sketchbook, trips and bumps into Malloy, spreading yellow paint on her uniform. He says sorry and runs away. Malloy is left shocked. Well, the song is named Dilaw, and the characters are both artists, so I think yellow paint was obviously the way to go, and I think it fits perfectly. This part of the story, we can say and label Mackie as the conflict in Malloy's life. This meeting point of theirs is a way or tool to trigger our main character to break away from her status quo and, change something from her normal life. When conflict like this arises in stories, the protagonist has two options. Usually that's one, to pursue the conflict. The other option is to run away from that responsibility and neglect it as much as you can. And for stories like this, it's usually more interesting if the characters neglect the responsibility at first, because that's realistic for humans. We don't like to take responsibility because life is hard enough, so why do we take the risk, right? She proceeds to go to school, surprised to see the new kid in her class. She sees him on the front seat, painting on a sketchbook, without a single tint of sadness or cynicism in his expression. Time skip, and it's lunchtime. Malloy and the bullies are left alone, hanging out in the classroom. And to make fun of Mackie's sketchbook, and eventually rips the paper he's working on. He walks in as this happens, and the bullies leave while making fun of him on the way. We see Malloy's eyes dart from the bullies to the sketchbook and to Mackie. She's curious but also hesitant to say something. She feels connected to him. And so another opportunity rises for Malloy to pursue this conflict. And again, she neglects this responsibility. It's very true to her character, because people like her, they are not really the confrontational type, so they just let things by, even if they want to do something, they're kind of afraid to do that thing. And so they eventually end up neglecting that responsibility. While on the way home from school, Malloy sees Mackie sitting on the side of the road trying to fix his sketchbook. While staying a few steps away, Malloy reaches into her bag and gives him tape. And here, we have our protagonist, Malloy, finally stepping up. Even if she's still a bit hesitant and a few steps away, she still gives her helping hand. This is the protagonist finally stepping up and taking the responsibility. This is another opportunity for her to pursue that conflict. And in this time, she finally gains the courage to break away from her status quo and pursue the opportunity for growth. I think Malloy here sees Mackie as this kind of childlike personality and persona, and she felt bad for him, and she really wanted to help. I think I kind of use influences from those stories and like TV shows, films, and games where an old, cynical, usually violent dad gets an adopted, naive, and optimistic child. Examples of this are like Logan, The Last of Us, and The Mandalorian. Throughout their story, they banter and share moments with each other until a conflict arises and they see themselves actually caring for the other person, which then eventually grow. And the old cynical dad grows into this more empathetic, more understanding person, and the child grows to be more mature and wise and more calculated with their movements. And in this growth, there's a trade-off though that happens when the dad loses his nihilism and cynicism. The child eventually loses their naivety. Malloy invites Mackie into her home. They eventually hang out and paint each other in Malloy's living room. So after that scene where we see Malloy finally stepping up to pursue that opportunity, I thought it was a perfect time to set them in a place where they can be vulnerable. And I think Maloy's house was the perfect place for that. Since Maloy isn't really the talkative person and Maki gets to share almost all the time with his words, I think it's perfect to allow Maki to be in her most vulnerable space so that he can see all of her artworks and he'd get a chance to understand her. And when he sees her paintings, he notices that there's not anything concrete in it and there's not anything like solid. It's more abstract, and he doesn't necessarily think it's meaningless, but he sees her soul in them. In that moment, he feels connected to her, like really connected to her. After that, we follow up with the scene of them drawing each other in the living room. And this was actually inspired by a TikTok I saw while I was swiping on my bed rotting time, that I saw these couples draw each other while they're at the dining table and they were across each other. And I thought it was something special to be able to see yourself in the eyes of your partner. And I think it was very cute. After this, it follows up with the scene where they touch pinkies for the first time. Sparks. I love scenes like this, especially in K-drama. You build the yearning part for so long. You build characters that have never even put a finger on each other or even a hair at each other, and you have a close-up of them finally breaking the barrier. And I don't know, it's just super kilig, and I had to put it in somehow. This sends him off to the second chorus. Childlike wonder, freedom, feeling the breeze and the greens brush by. They're finally one. Maloy has grown out of her shell. She's let go of the weight and the grief that she's carried all throughout her life. There's just something about coming-of-age movies and running across the fields that just tickle my brain in a different way. I think Maki was also very specific about this, because a lot of our inspirations were Monster 2023, Soulmate 2023, Bridge of Terabithia, All About Lily Chow Chow, and Our Beloved Summer, my favorite K-drama of all time. And when he was proposing Dilaw to me, he made a little video edit of a bunch of clips of friends hanging out in the fields and running around, and he wanted to capture that feeling of liberty and freedom and youth while running in the field. So I knew I had to integrate it somehow in the story, and I felt like this part specifically in this point of the story was the perfect time to put it. There had to be meaning behind the feeling of freedom. We're here where finally Maloy lets go of her past and she's able to run without any weight. And then they eventually enter Maki's hiding spot, the Jeep. And you can tell, spoilers ahead for people that haven't watched Monster, but this is a scene that was heavily inspired by one of the scenes there where Yori brings Minato into his hiding spot, the bus, where he decorated with little trinkets and artworks where they drew each other. And I thought it fit because Maloy had her own little intimate space, and so now Maki sharing his. I think we also took some ideas from Bridge of Terabithia with the treehouse. To me, this was such a big contrast to what Maloy's room looked like, and it serves as another moment of awakening for her, to see someone like her view life in such a different, bright, colorful way. It awakens the inner child in her. That's how we made Maloy's character finally break out of her shell. And then the scene follows up with Maki walking her home for the last time before she disappears without any explanation. Well, this made a lot of people sad and angry, and I'm sorry, but also thank you for validating my ability to tell an effective story. So, thank you. To quickly sum up, Maloy has gotten through to her transformation from being lonely and uninspired and lifeless to being this new version of herself that's like a child again and has found the joy of living again. I think the new challenge that we set up for our protagonist is how will she deal with if the main driving force of her growth and happiness and joy eventually disappears? Will she go back to her old ways, or would the new version of herself handle this better with the memories and lessons and life experiences that they shared together in a short amount of time. A character has to keep growing. There's not a brick wall that stops them. It's like humans. The only thing constant in this world is change, and we never stop growing and we never stop changing. We finally reached the ending, the last chorus. Maki was also very particular with the mixed media, and I was also, because in that time of my life I was also very, very obsessed with them, as I thought they were really cool. Feels so imperfect but also beautiful, just like how a kid would draw on anything. But to drive that even further, I wrote little notes, and we actually spent time brainstorming on what to put, so audiences can go back and see what was written there, and you can see that a lot of those that was written there are what Maki was saying to her or what Maloy was thinking during the moment. I think the mixed media also further emphasized our vision of the story, that we wanted it to be more childlike, and we wanted to also tell the people that, holding on to that childlike sense of joy is what keeps us sane in this world when we're adults now. That's something we need to hold on to. And with that, she's fully grown into a new person. And that concludes my thought process for this music video. I want to thank Maki and Maloy and everyone so much for the success of Dilaw, the music video. I think it's around 27 views right now, so I'm very, very grateful for that. And thank you. I hope you guys learned something while watching this video, and I'll be forever grateful that I was able to leave a mark in OPM history. And I certainly hope it's not the last.